Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Pia de Solenni, President and Executive Director of the recently founded Global Institute of Church Management, where we operate educational programs for parishes, dioceses, schools, institutes of consecrated life, hospitals, and other ministries of the Catholic Church to advance best management practices that reflect the Church's moral and social teachings. There will be more information on our program of church management in Rome right after this program. Knowing that our work requires a strong spiritual core, we are so pleased to be partnering with EWTN to present this series of reflections on St. Joseph. Today, we are honored to be joined by the Reverend Noël Kouankam Tchapda, a graduate of the PCM program in Rome. He is from Cameroon and a canon law doctoral candidate at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome. He will be reflecting on the theme of St. Joseph as the father of Jesus. Thank you for joining us in this journey of reflection and prayer.
Dear brothers and sisters, recently the Holy Father invited the whole Church to reflect on the person of Joseph. He came to the conclusion and the proposal of this option after we went through all together through the pandemic, which is not over yet. But the Holy Father proposed the reflection on St. Joseph after observing what happened throughout the world. He saw throughout the pandemic how some people dedicated their lives at the service of others, among which he counted the nurses, the medical doctors, the priests, religious, volunteers, and many other people whose silent dedication kept the world moving in spite of everything. So on the occasion of the celebration of the 150th anniversary of the proclamation of St. Joseph as the protector of the whole Church, he said to himself, but why not share some personal reflections on the special nature of this man who was the father of Jesus, who offered his life for the Son. And so he embarked the whole Church to think and to pray and to ask the help of St. Joseph in this difficult situation. Today, my dear brothers and sisters, I want to bring us also through this meditation to reflect on the person of Jesus. As a guide and father, Joseph holds us in the hollow of his hands. But what is said about Joseph in the scriptures is very little. Very few verses are dedicated to him. At the same time, when we look at those few verses dedicated to him and we go a little bit deeper, there is something wonderful that comes out. I want to embark with you on looking at Joseph in the Gospel according to Matthew, especially the first chapter of Matthew, chapter 1, verses 1 to 25. That Gospel begins by telling us this is the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham. The Gospel of Matthew was first intended for Jews who had become Christians. It means those who listened to Matthew speaking had in their background some common cultural elements that helped them to listen to St. Matthew in a way that the words of Matthew would bounce back into their minds and bring out more the sense of what he meant, especially bringing the people to see that in the person of Jesus Christ, all the promises made to the ancestors came true, came to be accomplished. And so Matthew opens his gospel by talking about the genealogy. I want us to go through this genealogy bringing out the beauty of a few traditional cultural elements, institutions in the Jewish background. Three of them I want to choose to help us understand, go deeper into the meaning of this gospel. The first one is the institution of genealogy, the genealogies. The second is marriage. And the third one is this special exegetical method that was used to interpret some of the numbers that are found in the sacred scriptures. Normally, genealogies are meant to keep records of people who came before us, records of people, our ancestors, so that we can situate ourselves where we are and eventually understand our present to project ourselves in the future. In the sacred scriptures, brothers and sisters, there are a few genealogies that are found. The first one comes in chapter 5 of Genesis, verse 1 to 32, where the descendants of Abraham, of Adam and Eve, are given. A second genealogy is found in chapter 11, verses 10 to 30. After Noah came up from the flood, his descendants are presented. The third one, which is much longer, comes in 9 chapters of the first book of Chronicles, where the story is given from the beginning, from Adam, right down to David and the family of David. These genealogies are meant to give the story of ancestors, that is, those who came before, so that those living in the present can situate themselves. One of these genealogies, it is short, but it's interesting, is that which is found in the book of Ruth, chapter 4, verse 18 to 22, where we can find the family of David, and especially the fact that David is the son of Jesse. As you can see, brothers and sisters, genealogies are not journalistic or historical reconstructions. Instead, they are theological reconstructions of the sacred writer who wants to transmit some spiritual meaning to the message that he wants to portray, to give to his listeners. The genealogy of Jesus that is found in the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew begins by saying that this is the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David and the son of Abraham. Matthew intends to show that all these ancestors are those of Jesus, but in reality, the genealogy is that of Joseph. I say so because in verse 17 of this genealogy, it says that Jacob fathered Joseph. Joseph, the husband of Mary, who gave birth to Jesus. There is a breakage. Jesus is not directly the son of Joseph. But how does it come that Jesus is son of David? The ending of the genealogy presents us Joseph as the husband of Mary and Mary the mother of Jesus. It is evident that if Jesus was son of Mary, Mary was cousin to Elizabeth. Elizabeth was a wife to Zechariah, and Zechariah was a priest. Evidently, Jesus would have been of the priest's descent. Now, the second institution I want to talk about is marriage. In the Jewish tradition, marriage used to take place in 3 phases. The first phase was promise. The second was betrothal. And the third one was real marriage. The first and the third stages were not very, very important. The promise could be made by one to another, broken, remade, and so on. But when it came to betrothal, the Jews accorded a lot of importance to this phase, because there not only the young people themselves came together, but the families came together. The bond of betrothal was as strong as marriage itself. And you could not break betrothal so easily. In fact, if in the course of betrothal the boy came to die, the girl would be considered a widow and she would go through widowhood. So you understand that when the Gospel of Matthew, or when the writer of Matthew says that before they came to live together, it means Joseph and Mary were at the stage of betrothal, where the strength of the link is all powerful. So Joseph, seeing what happened, seeing that his betrothed was in a situation which is uncomfortable, she was pregnant, not of his making, he begins to think. Before we come back to that aspect, to finish with the various phases of marriage, so the third stage of marriage was a simple transmission, or a simple going into the family, going into the home of the man to begin common life. So Joseph and Mary are found in this stage, the stage of betrothal, and this is when the angel visited Mary. The third institution which the Jews had in mind when they listened to the Gospel of Matthew is the institution of gematria, as it is called. That is, it is an exegetical technique that is used to explain the events that are found in the sacred scriptures. They use numbers that are added, and the sense of these numbers help to understand the fulfillment of the message that is portrayed by the sacred writer. If you are attentive on reading the Gospel of Matthew, you will see that Matthew says that from Abraham to David, there were 14 generations. From David to the deportation, there were 14 generations. And from the exile back to Jerusalem, there were 14 other generations. 14. What is 14? 14 seems to be an addition of two perfect numbers, 7 and 7. And this 14 happened 3 times. 3 times 14. And the number 3 is a perfect number. It's interesting to see that when you consider the Hebrew alphabet and the Hebrew consonants that make up the name David, there are 3. There is D, there is V, and there is D. The D, which is the Dalet, is the 4th letter of the alphabet. And the V, which is the Vav, is the 6th letter of the alphabet. And if you add up 6, 4, and 4, that is twice D and once V, you have 6 and 4 and 4, which makes 14. So when Matthew uses this gematrian technique to explain the relationship that is fulfilled in the name of David, the Jews that listen to him understand the depth of what Matthew wants to portray. And if this genealogy is that of Joseph, it means that Joseph is the line, the fulfillment of the line that started with David. If Joseph is a fulfillment of the line that started with David, it is going to be the responsibility of Joseph of giving, of offering this heritage, offering the wealth of this heritage to Jesus Christ. When the angel comes to Joseph, he says, Joseph, son of David. But why does the angel call Joseph son of David? My dear brothers and sisters, Joseph, the son of David, and then the just man. Being called the son of David, it reminds Joseph that he is of a great family. Joseph, son of David, ranks among the sons of he to whom God made the final promise. He said to David, "Your throne will last forever." But in reality, in the present moment, that family of David has become so poor and has completely disappeared because of the domination of the Romans at the time. The Davidic family is poor to the point that Joseph is just a mere carpenter. The greatness of the family is lost. The angel says, "Son of David," to reawaken in Joseph the memories of his fathers, the memories of his ancestors. Not only that, he says, Joseph, the just man. Justice in that context, what would it have meant when Joseph found his betrothed to be pregnant? Justice meant for him to denounce her because he wasn't responsible for what happened with her. So justice meant bringing Mary to the notice of the judges of the Hebrew community so that Mary is placed in front of a responsibility of unfaithfulness. If Joseph did that, we would not be here. Mary would have been lapidated, stoned to death, as it happened with the prostitute who was taken to Jesus by the Jews and said, "We found her in the very act of committing adultery." And they asked Jesus whether she should be stoned. So if Joseph were a just man, like the Jewish community expected him to be, he would have let Mary be stoned. But no, the justice of Joseph goes beyond the justice of the Pharisees and scribes. So he begins to reflect and asks himself, because he loves this girl, "Lord, what should I do?" It is while he is reflecting and praying over the situation that the angel comes to him and tells him, "You are going to give this child a name. You will call him Jesus, because he is going to save the whole world." It is amazing how the reaction of Joseph is spontaneous. As soon as he gets up in the morning, he takes Mary home. He accepts her and accepts responsibility for everything. The marriage institution which we just talked about is completed when Joseph takes his wife home. The naming of the child is one of the greatest acts that Joseph is going to accomplish after the birth of Jesus. Because giving Jesus Christ the name that the angel gave him in his dream, Jesus is given through the act of Joseph a legitimate family, a legitimate father, a legitimate societal context in which he can grow up peacefully. Joseph therefore assumes the social responsibility for the life of Jesus. He offers Jesus a real human family, a real human context, a real human community. It is beautiful to see how discreet Joseph acts in the whole life of Jesus and Mary. The first discreet act that Joseph does is taking Mary with him to Jerusalem for censorship. Silently, he looks for a place where she can give birth to the child. When the child is in danger because Herod wants to kill him, silently, Joseph takes the child, after listening to the angel, takes the child to Egypt to protect it. When Joseph hears that Herod is dead, he comes back silently from Egypt into the Holy Land. And when hearing that Archelaus is still reigning, he silently takes the mother and the child to Nazareth, and where Jesus is going to grow up. Silent father as he is, he will take this child to Jerusalem on pilgrimage with the whole family of the Jews. When Jesus is lost with the mother, silently Joseph goes looking for the child. It's interesting to see that after this moment, Joseph disappears. Now, some people say Joseph died. Probably. But what is most important is to see that Joseph disappeared from the life, the public life of Jesus, because Joseph was a father, as the Holy Father says, was a father of a chaste love. A love that was not possessive. A love that let the child be. A love that hovered the child, but allowed it to blossom and to come to fulfillment. That is what Joseph was for Jesus. And it is beautiful how the Holy Father says in the 7th part of his letter that Joseph was the earthly shadow of the Holy Father. So God the Father's love showed itself through Joseph. He watched the child growing. He accompanied the child. He acted like the firm pillar on which the child grew up, so that Jesus could be as strong as the person we were able to encounter later on. He loved his son in an extraordinary manner. He accepted him and gave him the freedom he needed for his mission. As a real and good father, Joseph believed in his son and let his son be. He allowed Jesus to accomplish his mission, and that is, I think, that is the reason why he disappeared, so that he will not be invading, he will not be possessive, he will not stop Jesus from doing his job. Joseph, finally, was a reference point for Jesus. The silence of Joseph, the discreet manner in which Joseph did his work, becomes a source of inspiration for every father, for every parent, every person who has the responsibility of a child to help the child grow in freedom and love. Joseph was the father of Jesus. My dear brothers and sisters, I want to end this reflection wishing that all of us are able to rediscover the tremendous wealth that is hidden in the person of Joseph and see into him the real example of fatherhood that God discreetly gives us in this book of Genesis. Joseph was for Jesus a real reference point. I want to wish that all the fathers, all the parents, all who have responsibility over children are able to be as selfless and open and loving as St. Joseph was, to let children grow, but to be the shadow of God to all these children, for the glory of God and for our salvation. I wish you all a wonderful St. Joseph's year, that each and every one of us makes an effort to incarnate in his personal life and for those whose responsibility he has to be another St. Joseph. And I pray St. Joseph intercedes for us all. Amen.
Thank you for watching. I'm Dr. Pia de Solenni, President and Executive Director of the Global Institute of Church Management. We support the Program of Church Management in Rome, which offers a certificate program and intensive sessions to equip priests, religious, and lay people with the business management skills they need to faithfully manage the Church's temporal resources for the sake of transparency at the service of the faithful, to help the poor, and to lead effective evangelization for the salvation of souls. To learn more about our work, please visit us at gicm.org.